Aloha, this is Dan. From 2016 to 2017, I tried my hand at putting out video essays about film topics on YouTube. The production of it was more than I could handle at the time, so I shut it down after only several episodes. But now that I'm getting my podcast up and running again, I've reworked the audio from that show into podcast episodes, which I will publish by the dates that the YouTube episodes were originally published or intended to be published. This one was originally from July 1st, 2017. New content is on the way as well. Hey, welcome back. I'm Dan, and I have an obsessive compulsion to talk about movies. So here we are. On this episode, I want to talk about something that has really been on my mind a lot lately. I want to talk about my favorite genre of films, why it's my favorite genre, and why I think it's in danger, but also who is currently saving it. So I think I've stated a few times on here already that my favorite genre overall I think is action, kind of for the same reasons that I'm drawn to like heavy music and metal and rock because it's so intense and because of the emotionality behind it. I like high octane things. Also sporting things too, like surfing and jumping off of cliffs and stuff like that. It stands to reason that I would like that in my movies too, just a lot of intensity and extreme emotions and stuff like that. But growing up, I was exposed largely also to sci-fi. This is of course because I had a father that was a big sci-fi geek. Hi Dad. I grew up watching Star Trek, Star Wars, the Sci-Fi Channel, pretty much any space-related or weird thing that I could get my hands on. And by the way, I'm a Star Wars and Star Trek equal kind of person. I don't herald one over the other because both kind of stand on their own merits and I don't buy into one camp or the other. I just really love sci-fi in general. Sometimes I think sci-fi is one of the most misunderstood genres too though, because sci-fi really isn't a genre. And a lot of times when a film is being marketed or a story, they call it a sci-fi, but really what they're referring to is the fact that it like takes place in space or it has some other kind of like scientific element to it that's been fictionalized or used in a way that isn't currently real or available or whatever. But just calling something a sci-fi doesn't really tell you anything about the story and what kind of story it really is. Because to me, sci-fi is more of like a vehicle or a vessel. It's something that works synergistically. I hate that word. Or whatever. It's something that couples with another genre. So to me, there's really no such thing as just a sci-fi story or sci-fi movie. What you're really talking about is a movie of another genre that uses sci-fi as like its lens or what have you to tell its story through. So for instance, let's talk about those two franchises that I was just referring to. We have Star Wars and Star Trek. Those are both sci-fis, obviously. But obviously, a lot of people kind of fight over which one is better. And to me, you can't really compare one to the other because they're actually two different genres. Now, the guys at Red Letter Media, who I'm obviously a big fan of, they categorize Star Trek as science fiction because most of what they refer to, the way the show works and the technology and the astronomy and everything that is encapsulated in that show is somewhat based on either real or theoretical science, and they're using a lot of like real scientific terms or theories in the show and in the movies. But then they categorize Star Wars as science fantasy because they don't ever really, explain or care how things like light speed work or how a blaster would work. You just kind of take it as a given in this universe. In that regard, I think that the science you're really referring to more of like the fact that it's in space when you say science fiction or science fantasy. But to me, that doesn't really give the whole picture. And the reason that Star Wars and Star Trek I don't think should be compared as equals, not that one's better than the other, but that they're two different genres. I think Star Trek, it's a science fiction as a symbiotic, synergistic shroud or cape or lens. Struggling to find the right word here. But what it really is at its core, it's a space opera drama. And then, different episodes of the show and then different movies have used different genres too. But essentially, like what it started out as, what it kind of is in general, is it tends to be more of a drama. Now, we'll get into how to me Star Trek isn't Star Trek anymore, and it's not for all the same reasons that get talked about usually critically with the new movies and everything and the reboot. But that's basically what I think Star Trek is. It's aesthetically told through the lens of sci-fi. And then you have Star Wars, which I do think fits in the category of sci-fi too, of course. It involves a lot of things that could hypothetically be real, like, you know, lightsabers and blasters and spaceships and things. But to me, it uses the genre of action to really tell its story. So sure, it's, you know, it's a drama too, and no good story ever really sticks to just like one specific genre. Usually genres kind of play off each other, because you can't really enjoy like a great action movie without there being a little drama and stuff like that. But I'm talking about like the big picture. And I think Star Wars tends to be more action driven. And again, this gets to why Star Trek, a lot of people are deriding Star Trek, the reboots right now, because they feel more action oriented, and people didn't expect them to be like that. Because Star Trek has always had some action. Even in the old days, you always had like Captain Kirk and Bones, like, you know, punching people like this, which is just a horrible way. If you've ever hit anything, it murders your fingers. This is awful. Don't do that. But at its core, you know, I think it's always been more of a drama, especially like the Next Generation and the tone that set as the series kind of was like reinvented and continued. And what I think a lot of people in my generation tend to think of Star Trek, then went more, you know, it was more heavy drama with a little bit of action now and then. And then Star Wars, I mean, has wars in the title. People go to Star Wars to see, in general, people go to Star Wars other than to see, you know, fun characters and everything and their relationships. They go to see lightsaber battles and blaster battles and starship battles. So Star Trek is over here in the science fiction drama adventure side, and then you have Star Wars, which is more like science fiction adventure action side. You know, sometimes it can be a subtle difference, but I think that they are different. And to me, this is what makes sci-fi one of the greatest genres. It's not a specific genre. It needs another genre, at least one, to go with it, to make it a story. Otherwise, it's just more of an idea of something that's, you know, like either set in space or set in the future. That's not a story. That's just like a setting or a technology or some kind of like special futuristic or hypothetical element that is thrown in, you know, as a hook to the story. But what is the story really all about? How is it told? What is the actual genre? So some other examples of some really great sci-fis I think should be categorized under science fiction, not just what they are. So for instance, like one of my favorite, if not my favorite movie, is Terminator 2. And, you know, Terminator 2 is usually, it's put in the action section, and however people categorize movies these days, seen as one of the best action movies of all time, of course. But it's also a science fiction, right? Because it's in this hypothetical future where robots take over, which doesn't seem that far away now, and that there are theoretical things for, like time travel, and like putting human skin over a robot and making a cyborg, and artificial intelligence, and like, you know, sentient robots and stuff like that. So you have all these really heavy science fiction elements, but the science fiction is there to support or to go along with what the movie really is, which is just a, you know, a hardcore action movie. Another science fiction action I think is a great movie is the original Iron Man movie. You know, that movie, it's sold to us as a comic book film, but what it essentially is, you know, it's about like an engineer, an inventor, and then there's all this hypothetical but potentially scientifically sound technology that he does to create his Iron Man suit. And you have an action movie, so you have, you know, sci-fi elements, action. Jurassic Park is, you know, another great example. That's more of I would put that as a sci-fi adventure. You're still using, like, you know, sci-fi elements. You're using this hypothetical but almost seems real science of cloning and you know, DNA research and resurrecting dinosaurs. This stuff seems like it could almost happen. One of the most recognized and celebrated sci-fi movies of all time, Alien, which is a sci-fi, obviously, because it's in space, and there's a robot, spoilers, and there's all sorts of other things, you know, sci-fi, space, technology related, and there's aliens, of course, so you have all those sci-fi elements, but how is the story actually told? It's told through a horror movie. It's a slow burn horror movie. So essentially what I'm saying is that if you were to take out the sci-fi elements of any of these movies, you could really still have the same characters and a similar story, but you'd have to just set it like in the present, in the real world, and then you wouldn't call it a sci-fi anymore. You know, you would just have, you know, like a guy on a motorcycle, you know, chasing a kid, and then another guy dressed as a cop chasing the kid, and it could just be a straight up action movie. It wouldn't be a sci-fi anymore, right? Or like people go to a theme park and the rides break down, and, you know, but they could be on a roller coaster instead of a dinosaur. Or like Tony Stark is an inventor, but he doesn't become a superhero. He just invents technology that, you know, maybe already exists. Or like an alien, it didn't have to be an alien, didn't have to be in space. It could have just been, you know, people like on a boat maybe. I'm on a boat! And that's why you see like so many movies that smack of other movies, and you also hear movies marketed this way where you're like, oh, that's kind of like Alien but on a boat. I'm on a boat! Where people like, they'll either take out the sci-fi or change a sci-fi element and keep the same genre of a movie, and they just kind of transplant the idea and the characters into something else. And you see this all the time. It's like, oh, it's like Bridesmaids with Terminator 2 or something, you know, you hear this stuff all the time. I think that's just really interesting because not all genres need to work like that. Obviously, like if you were to just take a drama, you don't need another genre to make a drama interesting, but for sci-fi you need other genres to make it what it is, to tell us real story, not just have it be window dressing. But the other thing that makes sci-fi really interesting to me and why it's like pretty much my favorite genre, and why I always get interested when a new movie that's marketed as a sci-fi comes out. A lot of times, you know, if I'm flipping through like IMDb trailers and I'm like, what's new stuff coming out? And I'm, you know, just like going, okay, there's a drama, there's a rom-com, it's an action, blah, blah, blah. Stuff doesn't really jump out at me. If I see it tagged as a sci-fi, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm interested for a second because I'm like, okay, so like what's the interesting element, the hook that they're going to use? I'm not as immediately drawn to the other genres without there being something about it that makes me want to like be invested in it. And I think that this is a big reason that superhero movies are so popular right now, is because people kind of already know there's already a hook in. There's like, they know they're going to be dealing with superheroes and action. Doctor Strange is a great example. I mean, most common viewers I don't think were that familiar with Doctor Strange. I know I'm not, but I think people went to see it because they knew that, you know, a superhero movie, that they were going to get certain elements. So for me, like if I see the word sci-fi attached to a movie, immediately I'm thinking like, okay, there's going to be something interesting, some kind of hook about this. So that's kind of why I think sci-fi is my favorite genre, because it does that, but what it also does is I think it harkens to the same idea of why humans you know, created this thing that we call science, this exploration and understanding of our world. Is sci-fi as a genre is a way for people through story to explore, to express curiosity about things that don't even exist yet, but things that maybe could, or that we would want to, or maybe things that we're scared of, like in the case of something like Alien. It's a really interesting way to pose a hypothetical without having to make it a complete fantasy. And I think that like the fantasy as a genre, it is a much more niche genre. It turns some people off because then they hear the word fantasy, because you could essentially say that a lot of sci-fis, you could call them fantasies too, right? Like the way that Red Letter Media calls Star Wars a science fantasy movie, because what does fantasy mean? Fantasy means it doesn't exist in the world that we know it, right? That's pretty much the gist of it. It doesn't necessarily mean like elves and dwarves and wizards and stuff, but I think for some reason there's that connotation when it comes to fantasy, and it's inaccurate. Fantasy and sci-fi I think are actually very similar, but for it to be science fiction, usually has to be grounded in some kind of science, or at least hypothetical or theoretical science, you know, whereas fantasy can have no explanation at all, and it just, things are just more arbitrarily, you know, real in the world of the story. What makes sci-fi so interesting is that it is a way for us to think outside the box, you know, as storytellers, and to explore the world that doesn't exist yet or may never exist. Because I mean, isn't that what science is just understanding and exploring our curiosity about why, always asking why. So this kind of leads me into sci-fi and why I think it's in danger right now in the big budget Hollywood sense. And the reason for that is because I think that what's happening, and this is a similar argument that I was making with Dave in an earlier video about sort of like how Hollywood is homogenizing around the superhero franchise, kind of like playing it safe for audiences kind of thing, where all these franchises are starting to kind of all smack of each other because they all have the same kind of elements and like safe action. And the same thing is happening to sci-fi. I think just because like these days more and more movies are coming out that are set in space or whatever, or they have some kind of technology in them, but I still feel like they're like kind of like homogenizing that too. That what's happening is because right now Hollywood is making, you know, the bulk of its money through these sort of formulaic franchises, that Hollywood is not as confident to take risks and to explore things that haven't been explored yet, you know, and to use something like the science fiction genre to think further and to be curious and to ask questions. Just because you have a science fiction element, to me these days doesn't make it a good sci-fi movie anymore. Some other examples are the new Star Trek movies, and I really enjoy the new Star Trek movies, but I enjoy them as action movies. Especially the first two, and I know Into Darkness gets a lot of flack. I totally recognize the story and the marketing problems with it, and the sort of the redundancy of it, and the fact that they had Khan in there for, you know, complete fan service reasons, but it didn't serve the story or make any sense. I totally get that, I recognize that, but I still enjoyed it as a movie, and I enjoyed the first one a lot. But Star Trek Beyond when I finally saw that, and I didn't see it in theaters because I just wasn't that stoked on it, it felt so bland to me. And it wasn't just because it was, you know, Justin Lin making another Fast and Furious movie with, you know, Star Trek characters or whatever the criticism was with that. It just didn't feel like Star Trek, and that's because I didn't feel a science fiction. I just felt like they were just using sort of the guise of Star Trek to make another like kind of superhero-esque movie. So 10 years ago, I would have been more excited about it. Or other movies that have come out like in the same kind of realm, like Guardians of the Galaxy was one of the most successful sci-fis made in a while. And it was a big risk because they were using a lot of like unexpected and unknown elements in it, like a talking tree and stuff like that, which is obviously all great sci-fi stuff. And of course it was set in space and there were spaceships. But to me, like that and Star Trek Beyond, and even like, you know, what was the most successful sci-fi and the most successful film right now of all time was Avatar, right? That is sci-fi to the max. But to me, not really, because those movies, all of them, to me, just they feel very rote and sort of by the numbers. And I'm not saying I didn't enjoy them. I really enjoy those movies for what they are. I just see them as a pattern with the sort of disease inside of Hollywood right now with the way that they're treating sci-fi, is that they're sort of using sci-fi sort of like either a misunderstood, misrepresented, or even somewhat of a disrespectful manner, because I don't feel like they're really paying respect to, you know, the groundwork of sci-fi that was laid before. They're sort of just setting things in space or whatever, or other dimensions or something, but they're not using it as a vehicle to explore curiosity and to take things in new directions and to be brave and bold about the way that what they do with it, and also taking a genre that you wouldn't expect in sci-fi, you know, like maybe like a romance or a rom-com, and using those two genres together to kind of play off each other in unexpected ways or something like that. I know that in smaller ways there's always going to be great movies made in general, no matter what's going on in the big blockbuster world. But my favorite kind of movies generally are, you know, I like big movies with big ideas and big casts, you know, and like big stars, and like the whole Hollywood thing is very alluring to me. It's a really, to me, like big budget Hollywood movies a lot of times are kind of like, you know, big high intensity fun, you know, like riveting activities, you know, the things you would do outside, or music and stuff like that. I like to get the same kind of like rush from an exciting story and a well-told, well-framed movie, you know, that I do in other areas too. But I've walked out of more and more movies recently, sci-fi movies included, just feeling kind of like, meh, that was alright. And I miss that feeling of like, you know, the first time that I saw like Jurassic Park and Terminator 2, my brain exploded with not just the effects, not just the storytelling. And like with Jurassic Park, when that first came out, I was too young to actually see the movie. My parents wouldn't let me see it, but they did let me read the Michael Crichton book. So I knew the story and I knew what was going to happen more or less. But it wasn't just that, it was the experience of the film and the visceral, you know, when the Tyrannosaurus roars at you and stuff like that. They made that book real, you know, and it was incredible. And I just got such a rush and a thrill. And the first time I saw like Terminator and Aliens and just how exciting it was, I don't get that feeling anymore, but I'm open to it and I want to get that feeling when I see these movies. So like, you know, I see Star Trek Beyond and I'm just so like, I'll never want to watch it again. It was entertaining. It filled up 2 hours of my life that I don't regret really watching. But is that really why I watch movies? For me, no, that's not why I watch movies. I watch them for the reasons I just explained. Now, I haven't seen Arrival yet, but I've been hearing good things about that. Maybe that'll be a great sci-fi. And like I said, this isn't true for every movie that comes out. And of course, there are always going to be competent or good movies coming out. I'm still waiting for that like wow factor that I felt seeing some of these just amazing movies. And by the way, this isn't just nostalgia talking, because I can still watch Terminator 2 now and experience it in ways that are still as thrilling and exciting, because, you know, because as I get older and I know more about the production and what goes on behind the scenes and stuff like that too, I still can understand like the passion and in a way these filmmakers at the time, like James Cameron, you know, and Ridley Scott and the like. This is just my theory, but I wouldn't be that surprised if I weren't wrong, that they approach their movies like scientists approach like a new problem or a new discovery, with like extreme, you know, passion and interest and curiosity. I mean, if you look at what James Cameron did with Terminator 2, you know, he always groundbreaking stuff, and pretty much every time that guy makes a movie, he tries to push the envelope. He's obviously not just doing it just to churn out movies. He's making movies because he wants to always kind of discover something and create something new, and it really shows in his movies, even the blander ones like Avatar. Sorry. That being said, so what I'm really referring to about Avatar, so I saw Avatar 3 times in theaters. I was blown away each time by the experience. I thought it was amazing. And I haven't wanted to watch it since. I think I tried to watch it one time and I just didn't really care. And that comes back to another issue that I think is happening with sci-fi now too, is sort of the derivative factor of it, where, and this is true not just for sci-fi, but just like everything in our culture now is has to be like referential or part of a franchise, or has to be like an homage to something. I feel like we're really lacking like a sense of newness and curiosity. You know, like, what can I do next? What is something that hasn't been done yet? So to me, Avatar is a great example of that. So obviously, James Cameron pushed the envelope in terms of the technological advances and the film experience, you know, and the theater experience and everything. But obviously, I mean, you know, the biggest criticism was the story. The story was very rote, and it was been told a million times. And you know, Pocahontas and Dances with the Wolves and everything that. And I was against that criticism at first. I was kind of like, you know, just let it be what it is. Like, people need to stop saying, because you know, everything, if you know the hero with 1,000 faces or whatever, you know, every story's been told, blah blah blah. As I watched it a couple more times and then tried to watch it later, and I realized I really was uninterested in it, because it is essentially, you know, a flawed story, because it is really derivative. You know, there's just nothing really new to get out of it once you get past the visual, you know, spectacle and everything like that. You know, a couple other movies that are also kind of fit this mold that are also sci-fis is Prometheus and Interstellar. Again, really enjoyed those movies. I actually like Prometheus a lot more than I think a lot of people did. I thought that Ridley Scott really was trying to kind of explore some new ideas with it. It's just that because it was the first of a series, it's hard to really understand if, in sort of like the Lost fashion, and of course it had Damon Lindelof attached to it, so maybe, you know, though it really is just a Lost issue where things are just brought up and then never explained, and you're supposed to pretend that is them treating you as an audience member like you know, with respect, that you can follow the clues without having to have everything spoon-fed to you, which I take a little bit of umbrage with, because, you know, I don't like to be treated like an idiot, but I also don't like to be treated like, especially when it's like a big budget movie that's not like a fringe indie kind of thing, I don't like to be guessing the whole time. To me, that's more, they're making an excuse for laziness, but I could go on about Lost forever and it's all been said. So, but Prometheus and Interstellar, I thought were just, you know, in general, I thought they were good, and they were a step in the right direction, but they were still very derivative. You know, Prometheus obviously was inspired all by aliens, and it had the total alien feel to it and all the aesthetics and everything like that. I just really would have liked to see it either be a very specific prequel or have it be something completely different. Of course, you can exist in that universe and everything like that, but it just never really felt like it quite knew what it wanted to do, if it wanted to take things a new direction or not. So it kind of brought up some things and then dropped them. I don't know. We'll see what happens in the other two. Maybe it'll be worth it. Maybe I'll eat my words. But Interstellar is another example. It was a very critically praised, you know, and a successful movie at the box office, and it was a great sci-fi. It had all the great elements of a good sci-fi, I thought. But still, in the end, after watching it, I was kind of like, you know, it felt like 2001. It was the spectacle, it was the grandiose nature of space and our place in it and stuff like that. And Christopher Nolan has always struggled with really, I think, telling movies with authentic feeling relationships in them. But the movie did a very noble job of trying to, you know, balance emotion, character emotion and relationships with this grand spectacle and everything like that. But in the end, I just thought there was so much homage being paid to the, you know, the people that come before, like Stanley Kubrick and Ridley Scott. It didn't feel like its own movie with its own questions and its own ideas and its own answers. It kind of felt like it was, say thank you for the inspiration from other people. And I get it, you know, art is always inspired by other people and other artists. It doesn't ever exist in a vacuum. So another movie that I mentioned earlier as being a classic kind of awe-inspiring sci-fi was Jurassic Park, because of course Jurassic World came out last year and it was a huge hit. But again, I think it was more of a huge hit for this kind of homogenization that is happening in Hollywood, not for being a unique, awe-inspiring sci-fi like what came before it. Because just like the other movies I've been talking about, it's just totally derivative. It's just one big homage to Jurassic Park instead of being its own unique thing. It's like almost for the entirety of the movie they were just like, hey, remember how awesome Jurassic Park was? That was kind of like the overall theme of the movie to me. But I'd heard that they actually had some really cool ideas for this movie when it was gestating for all those years, you know, between Jurassic Park 3 and then the release of Jurassic World. There were things like combining human DNA with dinosaur DNA to make like these hybrid creatures and all sorts of other stuff that would have been really neat and unique, and it could have taken the franchise in a whole new direction, and it could have used the sci-fi genre to, you know, to kind of have an excuse to be bold and to take that risk and to do something that explores like human curiosity and all the stuff I've been talking about. But no, of course they played it safe, and you know, it was very lucrative for them. But I think that was a momentary thing. I don't think people are going to be remembering Jurassic World for as long as they're going to be remembering Jurassic Park. But my point is that I just feel like the sci-fi genre used to be more brave and bold, and that studios used to allow filmmakers to take more risks when it came to sci-fi. You know, just look at everything that James Cameron was able to accomplish in the 80s and 90s. All of his movies, with the exception of Aliens, but then of course Aliens was a completely different genre than Alien, so I think Aliens totally stands on its own, but everything that he did up until like Titanic, I guess, you know, really was a bold, risky, unique thing that he did, and they were all, for the most part, sci-fi movies. And I miss that. I feel like I just haven't seen a great movie that has a sci-fi scope and a sci-fi lens that is exploring something new and fresh. And unfortunately, this all leads me back to Star Wars. So Star Wars, you know, you could say, Dan, you don't know what you're talking about. You're full of it. You're totally wrong. You know, sci-fi is the highest grossing genre of all time because Star Wars is sci-fi. It's making money. It'll make money for the rest of our existence. I get that, but Star Wars, I hate to say it because I really did enjoy The Force Awakens, like I mentioned in that video with Dave recently. I loved The Force Awakens when I first saw it because it was a great experience on opening night. They had a bunch of people dressed up and they had like statues of stormtroopers and, you know, Darth Vader, and they had a giant TIE fighter in the theater, and like I got to, you know, see it as a special screening just for a few people, and it was so cool, and I did really enjoy it. But on repeated viewings, it just hasn't felt the same. To me, it still doesn't feel like, you know, Star Wars the same, not the same way that the prequels don't feel like Star Wars. This feels like a Star Wars movie, like it exists in the universe, but it still, to me, it felt more like watching like a Marvel movie or a Star Trek movie, which, you know, J.J. Abrams, it had the same problems as what I was talking about a minute ago. Like both of the problems. Number one, it felt too safe. It didn't feel like they were pushing the envelope. I wish I'd been there when the first Star Wars and the next two came out in the late 70s and early 80s. You know, that must have just been such a sense of awe and wonder. And to me, that's what sci-fi can do for an audience, is not just enthrall them, you know, and excite them, but also just give them this like, wow. Like I said, like the first time I saw the T-Rex, first time I saw the Terminator, just that sense of like awe and wonder, like wow, this feels real, this could be real. I'm watching it, it is real in a way, it's real in the moment of the experience. And that, to me, that's what sci-fi does like no other genre. Is it gives you that sense of like, blows your mind, the expanse of the universe, like anything is possible. It makes you curious, it makes you want to know more, it makes you ask why. You know, I think it's a really important genre. The Force Awakens to me was like, oh man, Star Wars is back, okay. But it just felt like watching another Star Wars movie, if I could say that. Like I said, I can only imagine what it was like when people first saw Star Wars, or The Empire Strikes Back, or even Return of the Jedi. There was something kind of new to behold in each movie, and there were new ideas explored. But The Force Awakens, you know, kind of like Interstellar and Avatar and all the Star Trek movies and all the Marvel movies, it felt derivative. It felt like it was just a big throwback. And again, I totally get it on the marketing standpoint, giving fans what they wanted, and you know, trying to balance all the different angles of what they were trying to. That movie had a lot to prove. I totally get that. But I still feel like it was a great opportunity for them to show that they could not only do what George Lucas did back in the 70s, but they could also do what needs to happen now with sci-fi and make a really great sci-fi movie that went somewhere new, took Star Wars somewhere new. And maybe that will happen in Episode 8 or Rogue One, or who knows, I don't know. But as it stands right now, I felt like Star Wars The Force Awakens was just another very, very well done, exciting, but essentially homogenized franchise movie. And, you know, to me that's a bummer in a way. It's a wasted opportunity in my mind, because it shows that, I mean, I don't know if it's a chicken egg kind of thing, if it's the market and the audiences, or if it's Hollywood who's controlling, you know, pulling the levers. But whatever it is, I feel like the movie-going experience, especially when it comes to this genre of sci-fi, has lost the original sense of awe and wonder and discovery and curiosity. Some great examples, I think, in more recent history are people like George Orwell, Jules Verne, The Twilight Zone, Ray Bradbury, or like, you know, Orson Welles and what he did with the War of the World. At that time, he was using sci-fi, like something that sounded real, as a means to see like what he could get away with on radio. Those storytellers of those times, they were pushing the envelope, and now I feel like the studios and the directors they hire, and you know, whatever it is, or maybe it's the audiences too that are playing, they don't want to question and they don't want to be curious. I don't know, but I know that I do. This leads me to my last point. There's one director out there right now that has really kind of changed my mind on this and has shown me that sci-fi is maybe in danger, but there are people out there that understand the genre really well and that want to keep it alive and going. And that's Neil Blomkamp. So I was late to the game on all of his movies. I'd heard about them, but for some reason or another, I just never got around to seeing them. But I finally caught up with District 9, Elysium, and Chappie. But I feel like Neil Blomkamp is a director that has done all the things that I've been talking about, what makes sci-fi great. He used sci-fi as a vehicle to tell a great genre story. So like in District 9 you had an action movie. In Elysium, action. Chappie, action. So obviously he's really good at action and he's really good at sci-fi. And the reason that I think his sci-fi works so well is that he does stuff with it that hasn't quite been done before. That's not to say that everything he's doing is gold, and I know that a lot of people had a lot of issues with his movies all over the place. You know, even though District 9 was highly rated, there's also been a big backlash against it of people saying that it was so obvious, that the analogies that he was using were really like surface and stuff like that. But you know what? Honestly, to me, that was just one element of a bigger thing that made like District 9 great. Was that it was enthralling and exciting, and I mean, maybe I'm a simpleton, but as the movie started, I really didn't like the main character. As he was set up to be, he was like a huge jerk. You know, as the movie progressed, I had no idea that he was going to take that huge shift and basically become like an action hero and save this alien species and stuff like that. So the storytelling I thought was spot on. All the aspects to that and all of his other movies I thought worked perfectly together to make like what I think is what needs to happen to save the sci-fi genre. You have a great story, you have great characters, you have great actors, you have really, really well done, intense action that's supported by great effects and sound design. But sound design in those movies, I haven't noticed sound design in a way that I have until I saw the Neil Blomkamp movies. Has really kind of brought my attention to how well sound design and music can play. And yes, even in Chappie. But I'm really excited to see what he does next. But Neil Blomkamp as a director, now that he's made 3 movies, you know, he's shown that like District 9 wasn't a fluke. A lot of people said Elysium was good, but not as good as District 9. I thought it was just as good, and I thought Chappie was actually just as good as the other two too. And what Chappie did, even more so than Elysium to me, was that it used sci-fi to try to do something unique. And I understand that a lot of people were just really turned off by, I'm going to pronounce their name wrong, I'm not even going to try, but the South African rap group that's in it. Once I realized that was going to be a thing and that it was just going to happen, I just kind of went with it and just let it be, and I was able to enjoy it fine. I wasn't looking at it as like, oh, they set up a good movie and then they put in these rappers and then it got obnoxious. I was just like, okay, this is what this movie is. And I thought it was great for what the vision was of it. Of course, it could have been different. Every movie could be different, but Chappie was what it was. But what they did do, I thought was really interesting. You know, there's been all sorts of artificial intelligence movies, tons of questions raised about like, what makes something human, or what makes something sentient, or what makes something real that has a soul or whatever. Like, can machines be that? I don't know. That's been a question that's explored in tons of sci-fi, but I thought Chappie did it in a unique, original way, because they gave you like essentially like this baby character, you know, who was actually a very powerful robot. He developed interesting relations and an interesting perspective on the world, and you don't see that all the time. Even in like Spielberg's AI and all the experiences that his robot kid goes through, I never felt like that aspect was explored enough. It was so much more about the spectacle and the aesthetics and, you know, whatever Kubrick had been going for before Spielberg took the torch on it. I don't know, it just didn't have the same impact for me. This was the first time that I feel like I've seen an artificial intelligence movie that maybe, yes, it was a little crammed in, they tried to do too much in a short movie, but it did kind of raise some really interesting questions to me. And the idea of consciousness and like transporting consciousness to a different body at the end, spoilers, you think that he's going to become a human. I thought it was a really interesting way to subvert expectations, but instead it goes the other way and he turns, you know, his friends become robots too, and then the nature of that, and like it raises a lot of really interesting like ethical questions, like and sociological questions. Are they going to be seen as people? Will they be allowed in society? Are they going to be like tried, you know, for the crimes that they did and put to jail? And apparently that, I hope it doesn't happen, but because I think it stands alone fine with open-ended questions at the end, but I heard that Neil Blomkamp wanted to make it into a trilogy. I hope he goes on to other projects, because 3 Chappie movies just is not, I don't think needs to happen. But I thought that Chappie actually was a very, very excellent sci-fi, you know, on the same level as District 9 and Terminator 2 and all these movies. I haven't been as riveted by movies in general, especially sci-fi movies, until I saw his movie. And then there's one more I want to talk about real quick, which is Edge of Tomorrow. Was the first I saw that before Neil Blomkamp's movies. Watching that movie, and I watched it again as usual. I'm way late to the game. I'd heard about it in passing, and it just sounded like a regular fight alien movie. It sounded like a video game, and I just wasn't that into the idea. But once I finally saw it, I mean, just the way that it was done, the way that they used the Groundhog Day idea to tell an action sci-fi was brilliant, and it was hilarious, and it was also, I thought, riveting, and they had really good but subtle character work in it. But the movie and the action was like so exciting, and the movie was so tense, and it moved at such a great pace. It reminded me of the way that I felt like the first time I watched Terminator 2 or Die Hard 3, where it just like it started and it never let up. It was just tense all the way through. And then the sci-fi aspect of it was really interesting, the time travel thing, but it wasn't used in like an obnoxious way where the time travel was the focus of the story, you know, which has only worked like a couple of times in movies, like in Back to the Future. But like I just read Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, for instance, and the time travel in that to me totally derailed that whole story, because instead of focusing on the characters and their relationships, it focused on time travel, and it was such a plot device. But I mean, Edge of Tomorrow just did everything right for me. So I feel like with that movie and that director, Doug Liman, and Neil Blomkamp, I feel like if they keep making sci-fi, and possibly Ridley Scott, if he really is kind of rediscovering sci-fi, I feel like sci-fi is on the verge of being saved as a genre, no matter homogenizing of Star Wars and Star Trek and all these franchises. And whatever what they do to sci-fi, I feel like sci-fi is going to stand strong. There are directors that understand it for what its potential is, and they want to keep it something great and fresh and all about, you know, the human condition and human curiosity and discovery and the sense of awe and wonder that you can get with a great sci-fi movie that you usually can't get with pretty much any other genre. And that's to me why sci-fi is the most compelling genre. It can really be any genre because it exemplifies like the human condition and human curiosity, I think, more than any other genre does. But we'll see what happens, because once you either continue a franchise or begin a franchise and it continues, like we have Ridley Scott and Prometheus, it could just get watered down and all just continually be derivative. I'm really excited right now for Alien 5, or whatever it's going to be called, that Neil Blomkamp is supposedly still attached to direct, even though I guess it's getting pushed around and roadblocked because of Prometheus. But with Neil Blomkamp's track record so far, it could be phenomenal. He could go back, sort of like the way that James Cameron took Alien and made it a new genre and like a whole new story. Who knows, maybe Neil Blomkamp will take Aliens and James Cameron it and make it into something, you know, fresh and new under his wheelhouse or whatever. But I think one reason that Edge of Tomorrow and Neil Blomkamp's movies, the reason they succeeded so well in what they were and in the sci-fi genre is because they were original and they were unique materials, not attached to or derivative from some franchise or, you know, homage kind of stuff. That's what makes sci-fi at its best. So Neil Blomkamp might get stuck in the confines of the Alien franchise, and everybody expect him to be like a certain kind of action movie and have, you know, characters do certain things, especially if he does end up using Ripley and Newt and Hicks like the blogosphere is saying. But we'll just have to wait and see. But I still think it's going to be a really good movie no matter what. I just hope that it's also a very, very good and fresh sci-fi movie, because that's what the industry really needs, in my opinion. But if you have any thoughts on this topic, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to chat with you about it, and I will see you next time. Be sure to visit breathingunderwater.us. Follow me on Instagram at breathingunderwater1. and drop me a line at breathingunderwater1@gmail.com. Please note that I do not claim any ownership of any media presented in this podcast, which is only used for promotional purposes unless otherwise noted, and all views and opinions are those of the person expressing them and do not represent any other entities discussed in this podcast.